Welcome everybody to today's seminar. We have the privilege of having Dr. Gina McGuire speaking for us in our final seminar of the series. Gina grew up in Puna on Hawaii Island. She also graduated from Kamehameha schools from Kea'au. She earned her bachelor's from Stanford with a focus on environmental policy and economics, and master's from UH Hilo in tropical conservation, biology, and environmental science as a Hau'oli Maunua fellow. Most recently, she earned a PhD from UH Manoa in the geography department. And some of her work experience includes humpback whale conservation in Australia, work on Midway Atoll and Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument, being a GIS analyst for Hawaii Coral Reef Initiative, also being a GIS analyst and ethnographer with Kealapono Agricultural Archaeological Consulting and the Native American Agricultural Fund. Currently, Gina is a tribal agricultural fellow pursuing a postdoc with the US Forest Service and very soon a Kaka Foundation. She's also a writer for the Desert Research Institute's Native Climate Initiative. And in her postdoc work, she's helping to construct decision support tools for reef to reef management on Hawaii Island. Aside from that, her research interests include indigenous methods, ethnoecology, and coastal systems. Today, Gina will present her doctoral work in Kalapana on Hawaii Island that centers around the mapping of contemporary ethnobotanical, biocultural, and indigenous ecological approaches to understand and advance coastal stewardship. Belina Mai e Gina, take it away. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm running away.
Thank you.
Short, so I'm. Oh. I'm gonna start. Unless that means that is everybody looking at my chest now? No? Okay, awesome.
The audio visual comes from up there actually up top, so it's not great.
Thank you guys. I'm sorry, I'm technologically impaired. Today I'm going to be talking to you guys about my work in Kalapana, and that's a lot of words, ethnobotanical, biocultural, kind of walking you guys through what that all means. And this work is very fresh. I'm just graduating from the geography department this semester, so just got my manuscript through. You guys, I'm practicing. This is the first time I'm giving this presentation, so ask lots of questions, stop me as we go. I'm calling what I do indigenous ecology, but trying to bring in mixed methods and a really interdisciplinary approach to how we understand our coastlines. So I gotta start by saying thank you so much. Thank you all so much for having me today. But thank you to my communities of practice, the kupuna, the elders of Kalapana who were really generous with their time, the field crew who helped me out. Just really, really blessed. A lot of different organizations supported this work, the Tribal Ag Fellowship, Halau La'au Lapa'au Ovaitata, UH, Hawaii Geographic Information Coordinating Council, PIPES. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that program, but might be a good place for you guys to get interns to help support your research. If you're doing work, I think they've shifted their focus back to Hawaii Island. Abraham Pi'inai'a Geography Fund and all supported this work. So just for a quick outline on how I'm going to go about this presentation today is just to divide it into kind of past looking, talking about Kalapana and its history. It's really important to understand that political context going forward. Whenever we talk about ecosystems, it's not removed from people. The people, what grounds us to the present. And so thinking about the people today, and that photo in the middle is of a community meeting talking about how to, in Kalapana right now, the families that were displaced in the 1990s lava flow, they gave them land in Kikala and Kionkea, but the lease rates are going up. So that community currently in
in a moment of trying to figure out how to stay on their ancestral lands. And looking forward what this work means, and never forgetting that any of our work in conservation, natural resource management has implications for our future generations. So I shared this photo. I went out holo holo fishing with the Kalapana family, but I just want you guys to look at this coast. It's the youngest coastline on Hawaii Island. And just looking at this photo and you're thinking about the vegetation, what are some immediate thoughts from you guys in the audience on just looking at this? We've got Woods new and some understory going here. But just how would you describe this photo?
Hot.
Hot, it is very hot, right? I'm going for barren, right? There's a lot of bare ground in this photo. And when you think about Kalapana, it is not a place that makes you inherently think of maybe abundance, or, somewhere that you're gonna find a really high quality, and I put that in quotation marks, high quality vegetation community. So backing up from Kalapana and just thinking about ecosystem science in general and how we come up with our narratives about different ecosystems. Most of the emphasis within conservation has been placed on biophysical data. And when we're thinking about vegetation communities, percent cover of different species, how we classify it. And this has led to a legacy of displacement of Indigenous peoples across the globe. And so I think I really like this quote and bring it in quite often, but the quote is, we spend a lot of time talking about how to bring wolves back into Yellowstone, but we've never had the conversation about bringing Indigenous people back into Yellowstone, and that's not even on the table. And this is exactly the same situation that we have in Kalapana, where the national park went in and displaced the Hua'aina, or the Native Hawaiian residents. And so looking at this map here, you can see this is the boundary of the national park. The work that we did extended just about here. That's where we stopped the map, but vegetation surveyed across this landscape. And so all of the Kanaka, the Native Hawaiian communities that were previously in the park at the time, originally 1916 and then again in 1935 when it expanded, were moved into these areas, which you can see have had really recent lava flows. And I want you guys to notice the kipuka, or the coastal forest fragment that's here. This one does not quite touch the sea, but that's another kipuka. And so what you're seeing here is a mosaic of different lava landscapes, and it's had tremendous impacts both on the natural environment, as you can see, but also on Native Hawaiian communities. And before I talk, are there any Kalapana people in the room? Puna people in the room? So going back to this concept, right? Our science is going to greatly influence where people are prioritizing stewardship, where people are putting money in. That's particularly true on the coast where there's a lot of development happening. And when we just do science without listening to Native voices or community voices, we're precluding that participation, rights to access, and then not just food sovereignty, but greater sovereignty. And Bennett is writing specifically about marine protected areas as precluding that Native sovereignty. So when I was just out of my master's, I did TCBS program at UH-Hilo. I was like, okay, I really want to do something coastal. I'm from Puna, so I really want to do something in Puna. And I tried to find as much information on ecology, ecological work that had been done. Oh no, you're good, in Puna. In fact, this is a really amazing statewide coastal assessment that has been done. And in a lot of places, this is the only coastal vegetation assessment that has been done. And so I looked at the Puna coastline down here and I was like, oh no, because all of our coast, we do not have a stretch until you hit, I believe this is a flow point, has a high quality on this scale vegetation. Community was like, okay, so we've got moderate quality and poor quality. And so I started going on Huakai, or, just cruising with some of the uncles down the coastline, down Kalapana. Going all the way around, we went, Kapoho. This was just after those lows had come through, so now you can't go all the way around, but taking cruises, right? And so it seemed like Kalapana was this hot spot for community interest, and that's kind of how this project took shape. And so I went to the patches, I was following this map, and I went to the patches of moderate quality vegetation sites to see what that looked like. So that was my initial interest. I want to do something biological. I'm also part Native Hawaiian, out of Kamehameha schools, really strong Native community at Stanford. So I was like, I want to incorporate Indigenous methodologies. And for those of you that aren't familiar, I'm sure many of you guys are, Indigenous methodologies are always ethical and culturally appropriate, situated in practice, ancestral and genealogical, rooted in traditions and contemporary, and they can sometimes be decolonizing and Indigenous led. And they often emphasize integrity over objectivity. So acknowledging that we're coming from a very subjective, personal, relational standpoint to the ecosystem, and focusing on that embeddedness over distance. So something like this might not work very well at this scale. If you're trying to describe coastal ecosystems through an Indigenous method, possible, but I feel like it lends itself to more place-based work. So I had different goals, and this is kind of a little bit of an umbrella beyond what I'm gonna talk about today, but I work in La'aulapa'au, so part of my work is engaging that community and understanding that as a lens to understand the environment, conceptualizing what is well-being within a coastline, both for, I specifically focus on vegetation communities, but also people, and then specifically for those kipuka. And so kipuka are those forest fragments, but it's also a concept, a term that's been applied to cultural communities. So Kalapana, with quite a few residents that have sustained and maintained their residence there, is known as a cultural kipuka. And so I wanted to nest the ecological science within Indigenous science and put forward a new methodological toolkit, hopefully to inform future stewardship of our coast. And as always, full, complete Indigenous sovereignty is really difficult to do in academic settings, but doing my best to engage with Indigenous data sovereignty. And that means that we have, in this case, Kanaka Maoli, Oiwi peoples involved in the collection, analysis, interpretation, and then dissemination and reuse of fluid. So this is the point where I'm at now. I think we've had very strong Oiwi and specifically Kalapana engagement up to this point. And so I think this is where we're trying to figure that out at the moment. My field crew, if any of you know me, Katie Holtz, and then Grant Kaizukai. So we started, this was in the middle of COVID, so I empathize with any of you that have started or pre-started your academic journey during COVID. So instead of going to the different, elders, aunties and uncles during COVID and being, let's talk story. We started with the vegetation survey. If anyone's familiar with Blanquet abundant scale method, basically what we did systematically, so every 100 meters we would stop and we would do a survey. So we started here, rolled the transect out at right on the coastal cliff edge, doing one, another at 10 meters and another at 20. These are 10 meter squared quadrats, and did that for the full extent of the coast. And so as you can kind of imagine from that original map that I showed, there's a really wide diversity of vegetation communities. And then in each plot, right, 5% cover of every species present. So it ended up being 111 transects, 333 quadrats. It was a full summer of work. And then we analyzed it. I'm gonna focus on the non-metric multidimensional scaling, the ordination we did. So that's a long word, but multivariate analysis just helps you to see in a two-dimensional or three-dimensional space, how your different variables are related to each other. And I'm sure some of you are much more proficient than I am at that. It ends up looking something like this, which is very stretched out screen. Here we can. Okay. So if you can imagine each of these if you can imagine each of these points in the different colors refers to their kind of status. And so I went back and forth on, you know, which plants are naturalized, like a mango or an avocado tree, not classifying it as alien, but naturalized. And then right here, what we're highlighting, the species that are named right now are species that are valuable within a place-based index. And I'm going to get back to that in a second. But basically the distance between the different species is how close or not close, similar they are within ecological space. So axis 1 was highly correlated with this is the age of lava flow. So these black dots here are the different plat ages, and I'll have the key on the next one. Age of lava flow, it gets older sort of as you go this way, and then distance inland. So those immediate more cliff edge sites on the bottom, and then inland sites at the top. So rewind for a second. But what we did, because we originally mapped ignoring this place-based index, seeing all the different species together, what we wanted to do is then to understand from some sort of ranking from the community about how they're understanding, you know, which plants are important, which plants stand out, and helping that to understand the value of these different vegetation communities. So we took 3 different ethnohistoric accounts of Kalapana. That one is basically 1916 through 1935 account. This under the volcano, the people of Kalapana, sorry, stumbling, 1823 to 2010 was conducted late 80s, 90s by Charles Langlis. And then Hali'a Lohano Kalapana is a more modern kind of database. And so all of these have interviews, oral history accounts of different community members. And so what we did is we took the number of every species that was mentioned in an interview by a kupuna within an oral history. And then we divided it by the total number to get kind of a ranking of which species are talked about the most. And some of the species that were talked about, like kalo, we didn't see them. They don't grow on the coastal edge. And then others like niu, coconut, which was the top right under kalo species. So just kind of getting, this is a first stab at integrating into what is an ecological, well, you can use it for non-ecological data, but a very science mathematical based system, and then bringing in the culture into that as a first stab. So what you're seeing here is uhaloa, noni, qualiava, guava, and coconut, which were the plants that folks identified. And then I want you guys just to take a look at where they're occurring. They don't all occur in the same spot. So Pandanus scutoris, you have your hala. Is actually an outplanting community. So as I said, this is the younger lava substrate. This is where people are really working on community-based stewardship. At the top, these are the older substrate pages. You have your Milo and your coconut groves associated together. These are ancestral groves that we're documenting. And then you'll notice in here, you've got your guava, your uhaloa, and your hau growing together. So that's a really, I would say, we're starting to pick up on a really unique kind of human influence on the coastline. And then not too much, not a lot of culturally important species from those accounts noted in here, other than we have ohia and then qualiava. So just starting to partition the coastline, not just from an ecological perspective, but from a really cultural perspective. And what I want you guys to notice is that we have important cultural species across all the different sites. it's a very much more fairly even distribution of species than what I'm about to show next. So then we're like, okay, what if we thought about this coastline from a conservation priority? What are people classically protecting within restoration work? And so first asking every species that we found, that we surveyed in our vegetation surveys, we asked, okay, is this an indigenous or a canoe species? Is it native? Gave it a score. Is it endemic? Gave it a little bit higher score. Is it endangered? Then we added an extra score. Is it threatened? And so thinking about things like Gina and Hala in here. And then is it rare occurring? And so some of the plants actually got all 5 scores on there. And so I think folks are familiar with the Shimon Byroni bench grass. I think is not threatened, but all the others. Ipomoea tuboides, rare occurring, the moonflower only occurs in one spot on this whole coastline. It's naturally rarely occurring, and then Okia again popping up within this scale. So then when we visualize the plant community from this indices, now you're looking at, okay, so now our indigenous coastal tree groves are no longer being emphasized. They're emphasized as indigenous canoe species, right? Niu and Nilo again are up here. We've got Hala, this outplanted community, but now this area that was not completely recognized within that place-based indices is really lighting up for that the moonflower, Okia, Ama'u, Kilo, beach grass, and then we have Akia. So there's something really interesting going on in this community. So I want you guys to hold on to all of that knowledge, and I'm gonna jump into a totally different direction, going from here and then bring this back in. But are there any questions before I jump there? Yeah.
I didn't really get what X1 and X2 means. I got that one of them means the older chemical.
Yeah.
What does that other axis mean?
I should have the correlation coefficients off the top of my head right now, but getting older, and this is moving inland, so we only went in like 30 meters into from the coastal edge environment. So yeah, these are much more closer to salt spray than those are. And thinking about this coastline too, you have not just new lava growth coming in, right? But you also have erosion. So what's really interesting is on the older, as it gets older, a lot of those coastlines have eroded. So what might have been a community that was further inland is now more immediate coastal edge. So they're in constant transition and evolution. But yeah, that's a really great question. Does anybody else have a question? Okay. So I want you to hold on to that, right? We're ranking different species differently from different value systems and seeing where they occur on the landscape. We're also looking, so dividing the coast into different coastal units. And what you can see here is I just have the Ahupua'a name and then the geologic age of each of these. And so these are the units along that coastline that have more than 3 native species. And the reason why I did that is because if you remember that original map with Jacoby and Warshauer did the statewide coastal assessment, and they ranked this as very high quality. This is your moderate and poor quality, and this is just high quality coastlines. And I wanted to see, okay, when we take that valuation of a coastline and then you compare it to what's actually going on in some of these more Kipuka, like really fragmented coastal areas, how does that compare to their classification? So what you're seeing here in gray, these are all non-native species numbers. And then the red is what you're looking at, the native species. And so I was like, okay, this is really interesting. If you remember those, they're marked up in red in the bottom right-hand corner. That is really Kikala and Kiokia. They have really high proportions of native communities. Well, they also have really high communities of non-native species, but compared to some of your older Kipuka, these are between, this is how like unspecific we have for geology, right? 1.5 to 3,000 years old. And you look at the proportion of invasive species to native species, it's much higher. And so this is where we're picking up on those, you're seeing the hau and the guava together, the uhalo and the kualiala. This is a really, you're picking up on more ancestral remnant forest gardens, right? You're seeing naturalized plants, alien species, and native species persisting together where there's high human influence. And then I want to point out Kaimu on 400-year-old substrate. And there are other coconut groves that are kind of buried in here and in here. But when you have an ancestral grove of Milo and coconut and noni, that's the only thing that grows, and it kind of keeps out invasive species in a really weird self-maintaining system. So that's another, I think, area for future work, is looking at indigenous canoe plant communities and the way that they're excluding the invasives. Does anybody have any questions about? So this is just another way to see, like, now that we're looking at the number of species within each of these units, what are those species? And so I was particularly interested in the grass communities. This is where you're seeing that akia growing. You've got ohia, ama'u, so a lot of your endemic species, hilo beach grass and ma'uakiaki growing. What's now important to understand is the fragmentation and the effect of that, but they only grow here. You're not seeing them in other spots of the coastline. Similarly, behaves similarly is Konaoa pehu, which only grows on the older substrate and it's not on these younger 200-year-old flows. So just understanding vegetation communities by what's there, but then applying, going back to that indigenous method. So we observed all of this really cool stuff, all these cool plants, and I was like, you know, of course, you know, the aunties and the uncles have stories about these systems. And so really wanting to engage kanaka-oiwi methodologies and instead of calling them an interview or a walking interview, really naming them mo'olelo and puaka'i and seeing how that's different and that's a distinct methodology. And so Ka'iwi Funikawi Kabekiulipe, she is the first one to write about mo'olelo as method, the receiving and the giving. And so within my dissertation, we focused on collecting mo'olelo from 4 different categories: la'au lapa'au, practitioners, pa'akai, people who are making sea salt, practitioners, kua'aina, which just the rural subsiders of Kalapana, and then distinctly in puaka'i, which just means going out to different places with those families. So just defining kua'aina for everyone, Daviana McGuire wrote about this, someone who embodied the backbone of the land, the native Hawaiians who remained in rural communities. Ever Islands took care of the kupuna or elders, continued to speak Hawaiian, bent their backs and worked and sweated in the kalo patches and sweet potato fields, and held that which is precious and sacred in the culture in their care. So this is not everybody, and I have to be really specific about this because there are both native and non-native people subsiding in Kalapana today. So thinking really carefully about who you're interviewing, who you're talking story to, and individuals were selected for their recognition within the community as knowledge and cultural bearers. Instead of calling them practitioners, I'm kind of switching the language to call them living cultural entities. I had an auntie correct me, she's like, it's not practice, it's my life. And I was like, okay, like, I'm gonna make that distinction. And then continued relationship to the Kalapana Coast. So there's a lot of people who have been displaced and who have moved away. And so it was finding not just residents, but also a broader group of Pua'aina who some of them commute back to their ancestral homelands. And Kalapana is a really unique community. It's at the end of the road. If any of you guys have been, it's I showed this photo because a lot of the resource management is self-enforced, community-based management. It's a really unique community to work in. So, and then within Huakai, we decided to call them distinct different types of Huakai. And so being really clear about, okay, Awana is when we're just cruising holo holo, we're like, what are you letting that anti-nautical me? I'm not asking questions, we're just, we would often go for a drive and then stop over at different places. And so this isn't wandering without a mission, but there's no purpose and except for relationship building to people. Akibike is when you're going with a specific purpose. So if I need to go gather hala leaves, and so we're going specifically for that. Akibale is when I started to go myself, and so as a la'aulapa'au student, going I need puhaloa and going in, and so that's a specific pukai when I'm alone. And then holo holo, it's just going fishing. And so when you're, shoreline fishing, you're not thinking about plant communities, but in weird ways you actually are. So adding that to the list. And so I want you to keep in mind all those previous understandings of the vegetation communities, how fragmented they are, how different species only occur in certain places, understanding that from endemic, indigenous, that kind of lens. And then when you bring in the mo'olelo and the huakai and you're standing in one of these new groves, what that kind of understanding can add to this. So now I just ignoring the species and focusing on different communities, right? As I've said already, these are outplanting communities that Kanaka have went out and put hala, ka'e'e, Niu is another one, but Niu ends up being more strongly associated just in, I don't know if you guys remember that picture of scattered the new babies on the field, and then versus the density of the new groves up there. So we have our ancestral coconut needle groves, outplanted groves, I wouldn't call them groves yet, outplanted hotspots. And then we've got our grass association with a lot of those endemics. And then we've got, this is those forest gardens. And so being visualized here now, it's by the plant form, so trees, grasses, and then by their status, right? So again, a lot of those endemics in that area. And this is important because then with this cultural understanding and being in person, listening to the stories of how important, I remember my grandfather planting this tree, or every time we come out here, we plant another one. The legacy of different sites, or, oh yeah, we used to, we had our family garden and we grew something, or I'm blanking on, I know I'm blanking in front of you all. But in these gardens, right, thinking about different stories, guava in particular, and how as being particularly important for la'aulapa'au practices, guava leaves, and then thinking about how for portage, and what they used to do on this coastline is they had canoe landings, and they would roll the canoes off of the rocks onto the oki'a logs. And so everything that was used for up until I would say the 1960s pretty much was grown in these areas, these remnant forest gardens. So now taking all of those understandings and trying to remap the coastline. And so I want you guys to think about that original map that I showed, which is talking about quality of coastline, high quality, poor quality, and pretty much all of this, except for right here and here, is poor quality on that map. And we can challenge that kind of understanding and that mapping of that coast, not just from, okay, number of species, and here and here, and then right here, these two spots kind of I don't want to say outcompete, like, are higher than that survey kind of would have suggested. but also remapping this coastline from a biocultural association kind of lens. So where is community really active right now in replanting, revegetating its coastline? Where has community, where are kupuna spots still persisting? And that's, we can say it's not in a lot of places. There's one here, and wait, there's one behind 15 over here. Where is the Native Grass Association, which is really, really rich vegetation. So I think this is super important, but I want to throw the question on to you guys because it took me a long time to get to here. But why is it important from a management perspective? I got the question in my dissertation defense, but the Kanaka, the Antisima, they all know this. They know their coastline. They know where to find their plants. They know that their coastline is special. But why is it important to make this legible from a management perspective?
I would just say like if it's not communicated in a way that's understandable to management entities, then it'll never like be a priority or can't be integrated into the plan somehow, but when it is like shown to them and now they know it's there, they can acknowledge it and try to find a way to incorporate it.
That's awesome. That's a great answer. Does anyone else have anything they want to add? Okay, that was a really awesome answer. So I was gonna scroll back up to, well, all the way up to the beginning. But when you look at this map, kind of rephrasing the question. Find it. Okay. If you're a resource manager with not a lot of money, you got to decide where you're going to prioritize your management. And there are already quite a few really very high quality hotspots. So let's just say you belong in Puna, Hawaii, this district. Where would you want to prioritize your funding? If this is what's available to you. Do you go for the very high quality? Oh, we don't have very high quality spots and focus all your attention into preserving those, which is what national parks and state forest reserves have really focused on. Do you go into the moderate quality? Do you go into the poor and kind of start from scratch? See it as an opportunity. And I don't think there's any right or wrong answer. I think these areas absolutely, definitely should be protected and prioritized. It's just how you're going to do it. And then also from the perspective of what's important. Now I'm going to go to the next map, thinking about this map. This is a landscape without residents. This is a landscape without Hua'aina. And it's unique actually because Kalapana villagers have maintained their fishing and gathering rights if you continue to reside in Kalapana and maintain 50% blood quantum. But when you, I just want to like stress the importance of creating narratives of ecosystems of places that are deeply embedded, dependent on and entwined with their human communities, indigenous or non-indigenous, but this area does not look the same as this area, or I should say this area. And that's a large part to do with. I'm gonna stop there and open it up for questions, but thank you guys so much for your attention and your time. Scroll to the bottom. Thank you.
So if you have questions in the room, go ahead and raise your hand and Dr. McGuire will answer them for you. She'll call on you. If you're online, please put your questions into the chat and I'll pass them on to Dr. McGuire.
I have one rather simple question, I guess. Why Kalapana for you?
So my parents grew up in Hawaiian Beaches, which is like a 20-minute drive away, but that was the community that they were really involved with. And so I grew up on stories of my dad talking about, oh, when I'm picking okihi and pig hunting and, all the different things down Kalapana. But then it also practically, especially it being COVID, that was how I had aunties and uncles, not blood related, but through my dad. So I actually originally wanted to go do the Hawaiian Beaches coastline, because that's where they're from, and I remember, playing down there and stuff, but that community has changed a lot. And so it was kind of finding a community that I had connections to, that had continuity, and then had interests to participate in the research. So it's been a joy to go back and, how's, like, always asking me how my parents are doing, and it's helped a lot to use that connection.
It's just to build on that too, is now that you have sort of this framework for Kalapana, do you think if you have the opportunity to do it at some Hawaiian beaches, that you go ahead and do it? Or do you think you gotta start from scratch? It just depends on.
No, so it's been really helpful. All of my interns have come from the area, and so the PIPES program, I was like, this is me. But the PIPES program has started to emphasize giving it's specific, but within that kind of Weavy students opportunities to work within where they come from. And so last summer we did vegetation surveys a little bit further down the coastline. If anyone knows where Mackenzie Park is, right next to the Kealoha Ohana manage is at, and so adopting this method there. And so that was really cool to see it. Hopefully it kind of grows like a kipuka, different kipukas. It's the goal, I think. Yeah.
I'll ask you a question if anyone else has a question at the moment. So I'm just curious. Oh, shoot. Okay, nope. I'll save my question. We've got two coming into the chat. So first question, I missed the answer as to where would be the best place to start to revitalize those coastlines based on the image that shows the different quality of coastlines.
Where would be the best place to revitalize based on the images of the different quality? I don't think there's a right answer. I think that's a really great question. I think the traditional answer has been areas of higher quality or pristine environments. We can see that with Papahanaumoku and Kea national parks, is areas that are viewed as wilderness that don't have human communities that are caring for them actively. But I would challenge that narrative and say a poor quality area might have a great constituents or ohana basis that does care for it and is actively restoring it and deserves attention. But that's a really awesome question, and I think different approaches have been taken.
Okay. The second question in the chat right now is from Dr. Vaughn. Thank you so much for your work and congratulations on your graduation. Very clear articulation of many key concepts such as Indigenous methodologies, which made me think of things differently. Now that you have graduated, what do you hope to do next in your research and career?
Hi, Mihana. I'm with the Akaka Foundation and then switching over to the Forest Service in January in a postdoc, but I just want to stay in Hawaii and I want to keep working with local communities and also collaborating with other Indigenous communities, working with a team in Aotearoa at the moment on water modeling. So yeah, just kind of continuing to advocate for Native peoples. We'll see where it goes.
Thank you. And another question online from Stacey Torgoy, who spoke a few weeks ago and is working at the national park there on Hawaii Island. So what suggestions would you make for a land management agency that would like to approach management prioritization with a more huaka'i oriented lens?
I think that's a really great question. And I think the national park just bought that parcel in Ka'u on the Big Island, and they did invite local families to come and share their opinions and thoughts and stories on what should be done there. But I think the really awesome thing about a huaka'i methodology is it's not like a walking interview where you go and you talk story, but it's about transforming yourself and your relationship. And so, and it does put emphasis on reciprocal relationships, so gathering, but going with a purpose. And so I think having time or place or relationship building as a priority for management agencies, I don't know what the right word is, folks, as to engage with local communities, but also granting local communities that access and those gathering rights, which the national park has not yet given the Kalu community. So just, yeah, I think it's a great way to mediate that. Not a great answer.
Thank you. And okay, my question,
Yeah.
I'm curious, so it's a really common practice for us to map biodiversity of various kinds. And we often stop there, or we do what you're pointing out, people often do, which is protect the most intact places. From a decision-making perspective, we often want to focus on those areas where your actions have the greatest benefit, defined however it's defined for that situation, right? Can you just talk a little bit about how you think you can translate your work in mapping through all these different sources, the value of these places, into action? How do you get there?
That's a really great question, with, I'm sure, many different answers, but I think what I'd love to see and what I'm hoping to see is kind of elevating those communities. And so, okay, we're acknowledging and we're seeing that you guys have intergenerational history and influence on the veg communities. We're seeing that you're active and continuing to care for those veg communities, and how do we support you in that? And so not what, like, tear my hair out in Kalapana is every time there's a new lava flow, all of that new land that's created, and there is new land that's created, becomes automatic state jurisdiction and is blanking on the right word, but it's not actively managed or stewarded by the state, but it's being kind of under the table, managed, steward, protected by that community. And so I think it's an opportunity to remap it and then kind of take a step back and say, we don't know what's best, you know what's best, and how do we support you? It's a really great question.
So along those lines, we have another online question from Haiku Paholoa'a. While promoting conservation, there's sometimes the fear of taking away from the kua'aina. And this can include reducing accessibility, reducing fishing pressures, etc. And so my question is, how can we promote both conservation while also promoting kua'aina?
That's a really beautiful question, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about in terms of CBSFA's, community-based subsistence fishery and now forested areas. But a lot of the fishery CBSFA it's about restoring those, kapu on what season you can take or how big of a fish or how many fish you can take. But it's not totally geared toward what are the practices that Kanaka are doing with ko'a or Ha'akai practice, that it's not about strengthening good practices. It's about, which it's good to have kapu, right? But I think it has to be both at the same time. So a little while ago, I was like, we should make a CBSFA in Kalapana because they're already doing it, self-enforcing their own fishery. And then I took a step back and I was like, well, maybe, it's okay that, we're not putting in a marine protected area into somewhere that it's already kind of a very vibrant fishery. And so I think it's really difficult. And I also struggled on this question of making places legible or visible that have been kind of under the radar. And, if Nature Conservancy wanted to come in, and a lot of those areas are actually, the older kipuka are private land at the moment, with absentee landowners. And so could very potentially be bought by somebody. So I think it's challenging to want to do stewardship and promote community-based stewardship without taking away Kanaka gathering rights or yeah, it's a difficult, I think, line to walk.
There may be one last question from inside the room.
You just briefly mentioned in regards to the CDSFA that there's like a terrestrial component of that possibly.
Yeah, so there's, right now, I don't know how formalized it is, but Kaya Ulu, in Pu'uwaba on the Big Island is community-based subsistence forestry area, that they're working on, so that's in the works, but the fisheries areas came first, and now it's kind of that community-based management style is moving upland, which is really cool to see. Yeah, it would be cool to see a CBSFA that was like a whole format.
So maybe we'll let Dr. Vaughn have the last word there here, because for our last question, she put in one more online, which I think is in line with this question. Can you explain a little bit more about how community management works on the ground there now?
Yeah, so just kind of looking at how patchy that landscape is right now, I would say that community-based management is also patchy based on changing land tenure and different things. So Kaimu, which is a kind of a sub-Akupa'a within the wider Kalapana. Kaimu has the strongest, I would say, community-based management. They regulate their fishery, and they're doing a lot of outplanting on the lava fields, a lot of agroforestry, and then within their family lands, they have, you know, kalo, growing uala, and that really just comes from the family, the Kili'Ipo'omalu, and then Hawanio, Kali'Iполani, Ko'okaulana. A lot of different families have been able to remain in place due to it's been missed by different lava flows, and then also the legacy, like Uncle Robert's, Kili'Ipo'omalu, all of his family lands are in trust for them. So I think the community-based management is strongest where you have that continuity and intergenerational presence on the landscape. Hikala and Kiokea, which is that original community that I was talking about that Wa'aina have had to kind of relocate to after the 1990s lava flow is, I think, in us, they're moving towards that, but they're not, I think they're still gathering, figuring out what they're doing. Thank you for that question.
All right, thank you.
Really appreciate you coming over today, braving the rain. I'm sure it was an exciting plane flight this morning. This is our final presentation of the semester. Thank you to all of you who have been attending regularly, in part due to being students and being enrolled in this class, so you had to, but also many of you came regularly, even though you weren't enrolled in the class and joined. We really appreciate that. This is open to the public, and it is the most vibrant when we have lots of people coming in and participating, asking questions and engaging with our speakers. So we really appreciate all of you being here. Next semester, we do have some open spots on the calendar. Those of you who are MEM are going to be both proposing, and then later on, and the next week, we'll have all the students in their second year defending or presenting their final capstone presentation. So that's going to be really exciting at the end of next semester. But if you are an MS or PhD student and would like to present your proposal or your final defense, you're also welcome to do that during seminar time. Just let me know. If you have any folks you would particularly like to hear and you're an NREM student, or faculty, please let me know and I will invite them to present so we can have speakers that entice you to come back even when you're not enrolled in the class. So again, thank you. And we have refreshments. We hope you'll stick around and enjoy them. Stay dry, stay safe. Please get home safely this evening, and best wishes with the final exams. All right.